Madam President, Presidents, colleagues, now we have a unique chance for peace. If we miss it, we may not get it back for a while. So it is our common responsibility not to let this chance of peace go, because what would be the alternative? Further long days in Ukraine with senseless destruction and shedding of blood. We know that this war can't be won on the ground, only at the negotiating table. So, based on the realities, we must make the best possible of the situation. The need for a rapid end to the war after the start of negotiations can't be mistaken. The title of the debate was changed. The word peace was deleted from the title of the debate, as if one were afraid of a peace plan. We're sitting here today because the founding fathers of the European Union, they didn't want to see mass graves of soldiers in Europe. As a guarantee for this, they created the European Union as a framework for peace and security. We are duty-bound to preserve this because peace isn't just a political backdrop. Peace is a value in itself. People want peace. Europe has paid a huge price for this war already. Huge amounts of European taxpayers' money are going into weapons supplies and repairing the damage of the war. And now it emerges that much of this money has been lost to corruption at the highest level, and this Parliament isn't prepared to talk about that. The Commission President is calling for even more money from the Member States. The standing stance of the Patriots is clear. We condemn Russia's aggression, but in the name of the victims in Ukraine, we must call an end to this and start reconstruction in Ukraine. So the Union must support this American peace plan and not hold it up. We should not miss this chance for peace now, this chance for peace and security.
Madam President, appreciating commitment of President Trump for peace, it is impossible not to question the results of all the engagements of European leaders. What was achieved within the last year to bring armistice about? Why is European diplomacy acting like a reviewer who only responds to the announcement of American peace proposals? Why does not Brussels formulate some propositions first? Why does it not submit constructive solutions and valid negotiating arguments to the Americans? And the wartime balance of flows between financial resources between EU, Ukraine and Russia, presented by the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs recently. Well, 187 billion euros support was made available to Ukraine, but the value of imports from Russia was to the tune of 311 billion euros, including crude oil and gas. Negative balance of support to Ukraine is to the tune of 220 billion zlotys. So the European Union is far away from bringing peace about, and many countries are still not detached from Russian interests and Russian resources, and the European countries torpedo the propositions of tapping Kremlin's resources, whereas the Americans want to make use of them. I'm also sorry to see the marginalization of Poland ongoing recently, the country that came up with the most massive support to Ukraine at the outset of the war. If Polish government is not represented at the negotiation table in Geneva, if the Polish Prime Minister travels separately to Kyiv, well, we are not duly represented. Let us not expect that Russia will somehow react if we still have the ongoing financing of wartime economy.
Thank you, Madam President, Ms von der Leyen, ladies and gentlemen. Listening to this debate, you get the impression that international politics is based on expressing desiderata rather than the balance of power. The level of refusal to accept reality is staggering. For almost 4 years, the Russian war of aggression has been raging against Ukraine. Yes, Putin bears responsibility for this war. Yes, at any time he could end it. And yet, never since the start of the war have we been closer to a ceasefire than now. Now, as a realist, I can tell you I'm not happy about who wrote this plan. And certainly this plan doesn't set out a route to a just and lasting peace either. But at this juncture, it is our best chance to bring the war to an end. And you have to bear the responsibility to do everything in your powers to achieve that objective without, in doing so, selling Ukraine and the EU down the river to the USA and Russia. Now, first and foremost, we owe this peace to the Ukrainian people whose suffering and privations have to come to an end. You mentioned the civilian victims who had to die. This has to be brought to an end so that hope and joy can shape the lives of people in Ukraine. But I want this peace in place as well so that the burden of war can be lifted from the shoulders of our population as well. Because here there are also many people who are extremely concerned as to whether the war may escalate further and indeed how much more will be required of our societies financially. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that war is raging on European soil and the EU hasn't undertaken any diplomatic endeavours worthy of the name or even provided support at least to try and end it. Instead, here in this chamber we've heard again and again mention made of the fact that the war has to be won on the battlefield. Well, at least that's a reality that you're starting to change. Slowly you're starting to realise that the route to a lasting peace is not an unending war, but you're using war at the same time in Ukraine to unleash a massive arms program in the EU to the detriment of social cohesion, public services and the protection of the climate. And at the end of the day, who's going to foot the bill? The workers and families. Your political refusal to accept reality, ladies and gentlemen, your political idleness, Ms von der Leyen, has meant that the European politics has only asked to act once everything's already been decided. Under you, Ms von der Leyen, the EU has become a geostrategic plaything for the interests of the USA and Donald Trump. And part and parcel of the truth is that both Trump and Putin are once again carving up European countries and resources amongst themselves, pushing the EU into a position of being a bystander. They're looking at the spheres of influence and the reciprocal economic relations. And you are just watching idly by, Ms von der Leyen. We have to at least underscore the part in the plan that talks about the Russians paying for the reconstruction of Ukraine, but we need to see debt relief for Ukraine as well. We need to have security guarantees for both sides incorporated into an international security architecture so that peace can endure. We have to have both parties around the table on an equal footing. To endeavour to achieve this is something that you should have accepted from the start. I hope you can learn, but I still have my doubts.
Now, on behalf of the ESN Group, Alexander Sell.
Donald Trump hat einen Friedensplan für die
Donald Trump has come up with a peace plan for Ukraine, and Ms. von der Leyen wasn't asked even why. You were not involved in the talks because you're not ready to talk. you haven't sent anybody to Moscow, and you're proud of that. When a year ago Viktor Orban went to Moscow, you shouted about that here, but it's clear that in order to establish a peace agreement, you have to talk with both the parties involved. That's what the Americans are doing now. Instead of that, you have used the taxpayers' money, 190 billion euros from the EU. Experts say that up to 30% has gone somewhere else. 50 billion for golden toilets in Ukraine somewhere. So you were the defence minister for 6 years in Germany, but so far what's happened, there have been workshops. What is actually happening? People aren't taking you seriously anymore, but I'm happy that the Americans want to end the war. Too many Ukrainians and Russians have been maimed or killed. Too much money has gone to Kyiv to finance a pointless war and to line the pockets of a corrupt regime.